This is Nick.
This is Jack.
And this is your snacks break. A little bit different. Haven't done this kind of thing before. Jack, do you think it's a T-boy?
I like to think this is the best one yet. It's also the first one yet, aka a T-wow.
First time we've done this. We are psyched to have everyone here, all the snackers from the newsletter, the podcast, anywhere else. We've got some exciting stuff planned for you guys today.
Yeah, we're really excited to connect with you in a bilateral way for the first time. It's usually been one way. But before we get into all that, we got a couple words from our legal department.
You're tuned in to Snacks Daily. We spoke to the lawyers and we got to get something legal out the way. The snacks you're about to hear ain't food, it's ear candy. They don't reflect the views of the Robinhood family. It's all informational, just so you know. We're not recommending any securities. Nope. It's not a research report or investment advice. Not an offer or sale of a security. Right. Snacks is digestible, business news for you. Robinhood Financial, LLC, member FINRA/SIPC.
Snackers, welcome back. We've got for our snacks break a bunch of takeaways we're going to whip up for you. Before we jump into that, though, Jack and I wanted to go over the schedule for you, beginning with this quick introduction, and then we'll get into some how you ask a Q&A for the end of this episode.
Then Nick and I have whipped up three kind of mega takeaways that are occurring during this Corona-conomy, which will also define what that term means, by the way, Corona-conomy. That's kind of the meat and potatoes, but then we have a second serving of meat and potatoes.
Extra meaty.
Question and answer session at the end.
Extra potato-y. By the way, snackers, we are going to record this in case you want to catch up on it later or share it with friends. And we will share the following deck that we're going to jump into next with you guys after this episode.
By the way, I'm up in my home state of Vermont, in the mountains, trying to stay warm in my flannel while also rocking the best one yet t-shirt.
I kind of look like I'm in another side of the house as Jack. There's like a similar architecture vibe going on here, but I'm actually on Nantucket Island off Massachusetts. Jack and I have been recording the podcast remotely from these two locations. We're actually going to record one thing later today.
We hope you're all staying safe, and we're really pumped you can connect with us digitally here. So what's the mission of Robinhood Snacks during this crazy time? Well, we have the biggest public health crisis in probably a century. But it's really not just a public health crisis. It's ravaging financial markets and disrupting the economy more than we've ever seen. So more than anything else, our goal is to have daily news updates that tell you what you need to know.
And as you snackers know, one thing we love to do in the pods and the newsletter is sprinkle as much context as we can. What's going on in this crisis that's similar or different from others so we can understand what's happening in a better way? There's always an answer and some history.
And during the COVID-19 shutdown, so many of our daily routines have been flipped upside down. It's actually a real privilege of ours that we get to try to keep one thing kind of the same. We're going to deliver the podcast every day at 6:30 a.m. Eastern time, deliver the newsletter at the same time, serve up your snacks in a podcast or a newsletter, and try to keep some semblance of normalcy while so many things are changing.
Now, the reason Jack and I love doing this every day is we know this isn't just about the news. We are also part of this broader snacker community that we care deeply about, which is why we're thrilled to have you with us. So our goal is to connect with you guys. We've been dying to do this. We want to make sure we're getting through this together. And that's why we're keeping our same tone, our same focus. We want to be there for you, be the positive, exciting daily digest that you look forward to in the same way you've always expected.
We cover this every day. We know that 10 million Americans have been laid off so far. We know there is real financial and livelihood hardship, real pain in America and across the world. But it's our goal to be a glimmer, a little bright spot in people's days. That's why we're going to make our podcast the best one yet every day and try to keep the style the same as before so that we can keep on making your day a little bit more informative and digestible. So we are going to take questions and answers at the end, but you can start submitting them now through Zoom. It's a little complicated here, a little shocked about Zoom stock price given how many buttons there are. But if you use the Q&A button at the bottom, you can start sending in your questions now, and we're going to have a moderator at the end select your question. And if they do, we'll unmute you, but you'll still have to unmute yourself.
You're going to put your name, your hometown. We know we love hearing where you're from, and then your question, and we can't wait to get to it.
Okay. Finally, before we get going, I just want to mention during the Q&A, we will not be able to give investment advice. We won't be able to give recommendations to buy or sell a security, And we're also not offering to buy or sell any securities in this snacks break.
But there are a bunch of things we can do. We want to talk about the news. We want to talk about Robinhood Snacks. We can talk about the pod, the newsletter, our entrepreneurial story. We're happy to share how far we can run listening to one Snacks episode, which kind of changes by the day and kind of changes by the episode.
All right, so this snacks break is focused on the Corona-conomy. This is the biggest economic transformation we've ever seen. So we turned it into one phrase that we kept, Corona-conomy, and we're going to use that a lot in this series.
It's a unique moment because right now the Corona-conomy means essential services are essentially the economy.
Right. There's tons of jobs disruption, whether you're working from home, whether you're an essential worker at like a hospital or a grocery store working on the front lines of this crisis, or you've been laid off. Things have been seriously disrupted.
And when you add those two together, what you end up getting is a bunch of stock market uncertainty and a bunch of volatility. And that's exactly what we've been seeing. It's unique to the Corona-conomy.
All right. Now, we've whipped up three kind of mega takeaways for the Corona-conomy. One for economics, one for business, and one for markets.
So, Jack, without further ado, what's the takeaway for our buddies over in the economy? Our first takeaway.
This insane chart says it all. This is the weekly jobless claims that have been occurring in the United States since 2004. The last 2 weeks, to say they've been off the charts would be an understatement. 10 million people have been laid off because coronavirus has blown a gigantic hole in our economy.
And that shows such a fascinating thing about how interconnected our economy is, that lost spending is also lost income. When you're not going out and spending at a restaurant right now, that means a waitress isn't getting paid. And if she's not getting her income, then she can't go to the plant store to buy a succulent. And if the succulent isn't bought, then that plant store can't pay rent. It's all connected.
You'd be forgiven for thinking to yourself that, oh, we're not spending money, we must be saving. That's a good thing. That's not actually the case, because not spending means someone else isn't getting paid. That's why the government just passed a $2 trillion survival bill. We're not calling it a stimulus bill because the goal here is not to stimulate economic growth. It is to help people survive while our economy is shut down.
Now, there is a Fed governor named Neil Kashkari, who Jack and I follow, who summed up exactly what all these government initiatives like the stimulus bill get to: keeping people out of poverty. Because once you're in poverty as an American, it's very hard to get outside of it.
So, go ahead, Nick.
Whenever Jack and I are looking at these kind of issues, we end up developing a bunch of questions that we want to get answered later on. So we wanted to share the type of questions that we're pinging back and forth to each other when we're talking about topics just like this.
So we expect a lot of industries to get bailed out during this crisis. The airline industry, for one, and actually not the cruise industry, as we discussed this week on the podcast. But as companies get bailed out, is this irresponsible? Are we sending a message to private business that, hey, don't about being responsible financially, because if you move towards bankruptcy, the government will bail you out?
The next question we're wondering about, how long will these shutdowns last? Because 3 months and 4 months is actually a significant difference on small businesses.
And once the shutdown does end, how long will it take for things to get back to normal? Are people going to continue social distancing even though the government has said, like, we have an all clear?
And then we look at what other economic smacks have hit the economy before that are similar to this. Is this situation more like 2008 or after September 11th? Is it more like Great Depression or more like dot-com bust? We're looking for the context.
These are huge questions. We don't have the answers right now, but we'll continue to answer them as best we can as the news develops in our podcast and newsletter.
Which brings us to takeaway number 2. Jack, what's the takeaway for our buddies over in business?
We cover on Snacks Daily trends in business every day. And there are a lot of existing trends that are being taken by this crisis and accelerated, sped up in a crazy way.
You may hear friends talking about how there's a new trend going on. These are mostly existing trends. It's just that they've been kicked up a notch. For example, work from home is something that existed before. Now you're just forced to use Zoom and Slack, and you're getting more used to it.
Another example, cord cutting. Lots of people have cut their cable cord and relied on like HBO Go and Netflix instead. A lot of people, though, have kept their cable because live sports. It's kind of the only way you can watch live sports. Guess what? Live sports isn't happening right now. Is this going to accelerate cord cutting? We think it might.
then you end up wanting to pay for something. You're not paying in cash these days. And if you're in a store, you're not going to whip out your credit card. You're doing a digital or a touchless payment. This is something PayPal is seeing stronger and stronger adoption of really quickly.
Yeah, we also have a lot of people that are sick and tired of doing push-ups and jumping jacks. So they're figuring out how to stay fit by taking fitness courses from their home. We think live stream fitness classes is a trend that's accelerating with this. Could benefit companies like Peloton or Mirror.
You've also noticed that maybe movie theaters are shut down wherever it is you're living. That's gotten the movie producers very interested in sending their movies direct to your TV and avoiding the typical 90-day only in theaters. It's happening more and more.
We also think delivery is a business that is accelerating. I mean, there's a direct-to-consumer business that'll serve you monthly refills of razor blades, hair extensions, puppy food, whatever you want. We think that's an even more attractive value proposition now that we're a little bit concerned of going out and interacting with people.
Now, you've noticed Jack is ensconced in flannel right now. You may be in sweatpants yourself. The casual lifestyle you're wearing right now, that could accelerate to when you actually go back to work if you happen to be at home in this moment. Maybe wearing the similar kind of casual stuff you were wearing before.
Offices might be like, why are we doing this? Like, let's stop choke collaring ourselves.
Our kids are like
a little bit.
Not going to know how to do buttons.
So as things develop, though, we're going to ask some questions about these accelerating trends. Are the behavioral shifts, like this work from home wardrobe that I'm doing, is this temporary, or is there a chance it becomes permanent when the crisis ends?
And then if you are an entrepreneur maybe behind one of these businesses that's getting a lot of usage right now, how do you retain those users and maintain them after the Corona-conomy leaves?
We've said a bunch of times that the first mover advantage doesn't really exist. In fact, we think moving second could be best because you see the mistakes the first mover made. Does that apply to the Corona-conomy and first movers doing things innovative right now?
And then how long does it really take to build a habit? Because if you're a company who's getting used more than ever right now, what if that only takes 3 months and not 2 months? That's a big difference about whether or not you come out of the Corona-conomy with a bunch of customers or just a few more customers.
Yeah, for example, like a lot of yoga studios are live streaming their classes. Is that going to continue, or are people going to come back into the studio afterwards? These are big questions that can fundamentally change business models.
And then finally, our takeaway number 3. Jack, what's the takeaway for our buddies over in the markets?
Nick, you know I'm a car guy, so I'm going to compare the entire economy to a car right now.
I hear you, man. Let's roll with it.
Unlike back in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, the economic car right now, it's likely not broken. It's just in the garage, not running because there's a disease outside.
Back in 2008, different situation. We actually had an internal problem with the car being broken, and that was the housing market. But this is a little bit different.
Right. Back in 2008, we had insane amounts of debt across our economy. Banks were on the brink of going bankruptcy. Right now, banks are actually pretty healthy.
That's led to market volatility in this case, because you're seeing things like essentials like Clorox become stocks of the moment, along with stay-at-home and war effort style stocks.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, everybody else is much the loser of this market downturn. The chart you guys see on the right here, it's the S&P 500, the 500 most valuable companies in the United States. That was down by as much as 35% a couple weeks ago. It's still down 27% since the last I checked. So the average big US company is down 27%. There's a lot of pain in the stock market as the economy is pretty much shut down.
And as we tackle these concepts and these topics every day on Snack Daily, preparing your pod, once again, that leads Jack and I to a bunch of questions that we are excited to get answers to later this year based on what's happening right now.
Okay, so the first question, will this be a V-shaped recovery? On the left, we've sketched up a little V-shaped recovery. You see the aggressive downturn that has occurred and is still actually occurring. The hope is that as we stay at home and we let the coronavirus pass, that we have an equally steep positive upturn and the economy gets back to normal relatively quickly.
However, you could have a situation like the chart toward the right where it's more of a U shape, in this case, kind of like a scrappy U there, where the economy does come back, but it just takes longer than a quick V-shaped rebound. U versus V.
We really hope it's a V. But the negative outcome, if we don't contain the virus properly and if the economy doesn't kickstart, And if, Nick, to use our car analogy, if
Let's
the
roll with
car
it.
isn't okay and actually some of the tires deflated while it was in the garage, we could get the awkward U-shaped recovery you see on the right side.
The next thing we're wondering is, will the government take an ownership bailout of some companies? We've seen this in the last decade with companies like General Motors. Will this look similar? Will this look different? And who could it be?
Also, what companies are going to go bankrupt? We don't know. I mean, we could all make our guesses, but Ford Motor Company survived the 2008 financial crisis without bankruptcy. General Motors didn't.
Then we're wondering, when will the IPO market return again? We saw Casper IPO at the beginning of the year. It's hard to IPO in a market like this because there's so much uncertainty and stocks are dropping. When will startups feel comfortable again to jump into the IPO waters?
All right, Nicholas.
Jack.
Let's remind our listeners before we move to the Q&A. We cannot do investment advice. We're not going to be making any recommendations to buy or sell any securities.
Can't.
We're also not offering to buy or sell any stocks right here.
But what we love doing is covering the news, sharing the news stories, the takeaways, covering Robinhood Snacks, the pod, the newsletter, entrepreneurial story, and anything about our facial hair inequity right now. Jack's is way better than mine, or how long it takes us to run when we're listening to an episode.
Don't ask about the facial hair. Now we're going to move things off to Jess, a member of our team, who's going to take some of your questions and let people know who's up.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here. Happy to help with Q&A. I just want to let everyone know that we've already received over 100 questions, so we'll do our best to get to as many snackers as possible, but we just might not be able to. So first, I would love to go to Peter in Denver. Peter, we're going to go ahead and let you unmute.
Hey, guys.
Peter.
Hey, Peter.
What's up? So I've been working remotely basically my entire career. And a lot of my clients are more the old school companies that are, older founders, older presidents, and they're super big on the office environment. So they've all been forced to work remotely. And given my background, I obviously see that as a positive. But do you guys think there's actually staying power in that remote movement?
I think, it's no one can predict, but I think that at some point when this is all over, you're going to have like operations teams at companies that look at each of their departments and think to themselves, okay, we've all been working from home. How has the performance been? What key performance metrics are we following? Is it possible that some of them actually jumped because people didn't have to commute into the office? People had the comfort of being in their own home. People could take care of the family maybe by being a little bit closer. It's possible for sure that certain divisions could perform better. And in that case, maybe companies change their policy and we say, for this segment of the workforce, we want you to come back in because things are back to normal and it's healthy to do so. But this team, you're actually better off at home. So let's make flexibility permanent there.
Peter, one thing Jack and I love to do is also look at not just leading indicators, but lagging ones. So something we'll look at are like the earnings in Zoom like a year from now. And let's see how the corporate accounts for them have grown compared to what they were on a trajectory for before. That could be a helpful way for us to confirm that something like working from home, which is kind of critical, you need to use these types of platforms, whether or not that's kind of gotten a more solid base in the economy.
Thanks. Is it time for our next question?
Sure.
Yeah,
yes,
and we can maybe
please.
unshare our screens here.
Oh, my
Great.
bad. Thanks, Nick.
Oh, you got it? Cool.
Next, I'd love to go to Victoria P. Victoria P. Are you there? Hey, Victoria.
And remember, guys, you can unmute. Your
I'm
screen
here.
by
I'm here.
There we go.
I'm so excited right
good.
now. I think I could cry. Oh my gosh. Shout out to, can I make a shout out to my friends that are also listening?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Oh my gosh, they're going to make fun of me. Julia and Talia, we've been listening for like over a year now. This is super excited. We're Texans down here.
Nice.
Okay, so I was just wondering with the current job losses and pay cuts that are happening, how do we expect the cost of living to shift accordingly? Like, is there going to be do you all think it would be a similar percentage decrease, or do you think that job cuts or pay cuts will be steeper than the cost of living we will experience, whether it's, living expenses, any other expenses as well?
That's a great question. And I just want to shout out LaSalle, our top public communications compliance person at Robinhood. He's actually a big Texas guy from San Antonio and University of Texas, Austin. So,
well, we're Longhorns ourselves, so. Wait, will you hook him again so I can take a photo?
Hook him.
Oh, Victoria, I hope you got that.
I did. You'll see it on Instagram. Don't worry.
Right. So yes, a lot of incomes are going to be down. I mean, Nick and I were living in New York City in 2011 after college, and the housing market definitely, rents fell after the financial crisis in New York City. I mean, New York was the hub of the financial markets, and when people's incomes go down, people can't pay as much for rent, and landlords kind of respond by lowering rents across the board. Whether that happens here, is a big question. How long will this shutdown last? I mean, the $2 trillion survival bill gave us extra unemployment insurance for 4 months. So that was some sort of an indication from the government that if this lasts for 4 months, we got your back. If it lasts longer than that, it could hurt people's incomes a lot and really transform things in a big way. If it's shorter, like we've seen China and South Korea kind of contain this outbreak pretty quickly, then it could be not as big an impact on the economy.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Zach in Long Island.
Nice.
Hey, Zach.
What's up, guys?
Hey, Zach. I had a Strong Island.
Yeah, Strong Island. You know it.
Yeah.
I had 2 questions for you guys. Actually, I have 3 questions. First, what do you guys think will happen to Zoom once this pandemic's over? Because right now I'm in college, and all the colleges are on Zoom right now. Zoom was talking about from December to now, going from 10 million to 200 million users, and after this is all over, those are all going to go away.
Yeah.
So would you expect a crash on their stock?
Well, fascinating thing here. This is an experiment for universities and public schools. I mean, my wife is a 7th grade teacher, and she's teaching students through Google, not through Zoom. But it's an experiment, just like work from home is an experiment. People are going to figure out, can things function well remotely? And there may be certain universities that were already budget crunched, and they think to themselves, maybe we should expand to an online version. I mean, I really do think there's going to be some legacies and some changes from all this.
The other thing we look at from Zoom specifically is they weren't expecting this. And a little preview of what you're going to get on the Snacks Daily podcast on Monday is how companies like Zoom have actually become social networks in the same way that you typically think of Facebook. So the question we're looking at with Zoom is, now that it's being used as a social network, will they adapt the product for non-business uses? And that's what we're going to be looking for from the product development at Zoom over the next 6 to 12 months.
But what the people at Zoom must be just a combination of Hanukkah, Christmas, and every other holiday there is. Zoom is now a household verb. I mean, it's incredible how quickly that happened. I have truly been invited to 7 happy hours that all were going to take place over Zoom. It's not even a business thing. It's a cultural thing now. And the marketing value of that, I mean, to do an advertising campaign to earn sort of cultural mainstream status, that would have cost so much money. And Zoom basically got it for free.
Yeah, for sure. And my next question, what do you think is going to happen with the EU and their open border policy coming to trade and travel? Because they got really affected because they had the open border,
Well, with the EU, the thing we're going to be, this is one of those kind of predicting what's happening with the virus scenarios where we can't do that exactly. And it's hard to tell.
From now on, what because they got really affected because the virus and the massive spread. Do you think there's any change in how they handle their trade or travel between borders?
Well, the big thing we're going to be looking at is, remember, before we had this Corona crisis, we were dealing with a trade war crisis before this. And it wasn't, of course, on the same level. But that was something that once we emerge from this pandemic, we're going to have to be dealing with again. So one thing that is really curious, like really been interesting for us is the fact that countries are actually working together now on a bunch of projects from the Corona-conomy. Does that mean there's going to be more incentive to actually be working together on things like trade war issues that they were really not seeing same eye to eye on before? So we're curious about what's going to happen with that 6 to 12 months down the line.
Yeah, another interesting thing, the European Union with its open borders, that's essentially what we have in the United States with our open borders among states. Zach, we don't have kind of a super expert opinion on that. Here's what I say though. Also, I don't think we can give you the third question just because we have a queue of so many questioners. Zach, hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Jack, Nick's Nick of New York, at Robinhood Snacks. We'll all see it. And we can take this offline, whatever your third question is, and we'd be happy to give you resources.
All right, for sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Also, my wife's from Massapequa, big Long Island fan, best bagels in the country.
There we go. Love to hear it.
Thank you so much. Next, I would love to go to Chase from Los Angeles. Chase?
Hello, greetings.
This is the Chase.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the shout out to my wife on Valentine's Day. I appreciate it.
Nice.
Yeah, so my first question is after the 2008 financial crisis hit, then the market didn't really bottom until 2011 when when defaults on mortgages peaked. Do you see that like 3 years from now, we'll see something similar to that? Or do you think it'll happen faster or not happen at all?
Well, this is a case to the housing market.
Yeah.
So the stock market hit the bottom in March of 2009. I remember because it's when I went to study abroad. So it was about 6 or 7 months after Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And, when it comes to the stock market, we expect the upturn to begin once the public health crisis has been contained. We think the root of this economic crisis is COVID-19. And until COVID-19 is neutralized or brought under control, we think investors are going to think to themselves, the economy is going to remain shut down because people don't want to go outside. And in that case, companies aren't going to make profits, so stocks will stay low. So we're waiting for the virus to be contained for stocks to start to improve. And then with regards to the real estate, Nick, do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, also one thing we like to say very simply, Chase, is that this has become a medical problem, not a money problem. So back in 2008, there was like a money problem. It was the housing market. But in this case, it really is the medical one. If we can solve that, then there's less of an impact on the money.
But to the housing market question, our first takeaway is that the COVID-19 has blown a gigantic hole in the U.S. economy. Well, guess what? We had $2 trillion coming from the government to try to fill that hole. $2 trillion is about 10% of the American economy over the course of a year. It's possible that this public health outbreak is controlled within a couple months. It's possible it takes way longer. It's possible it's shorter. But maybe the amount of money that the government puts in is enough to fill the hole, in which case I wouldn't even be sure that the housing market is going to decline necessarily. We can't say for sure, Chase, but that's kind of what we're thinking about. There's a hole in the economy. It's filled by the government. Is it fully filled? Is it only partly filled? We're not sure.
Okay, and then I had a quick follow-up. Do you think that airlines will fully bounce back if businesses realize they don't need as many in-person meetings and business travel drops?
Well, a great quote after, the airlines got hit. Again, we love throwing context on this. After September 11th was the last time airlines got hit this badly in like an economic cycle. And one of the great quotes we heard, I think was attributed to Ted Turner, was that if there is to be civilization, there is going to be travel. And that ended up playing out. So even though businesses may be cutting back a bit in a post-Corona-conomy world on like business travel, that's really just a small portion of flights. Now, in the short term, a lot of projections from analysts have been that airlines are going to cut down on maybe the number of routes they're flying because they need to save money, or they may cut down on the number of flights they're doing overall. But long term, travel seems to be an essential part of just like humankind. And cutting maybe one small element out, like these virtual meetings, is just one portion of that.
Yeah. Chase, I love how you're thinking about this though. Like you could look at whatever your favorite airline is, and they probably have financial information about what percentage of their sales are from business flyers. And you can say, okay, X percent is at risk according to the theory you just came up with. And then find your best estimate of like how much of that will be affected. And then you can do the math yourself and think how that's going to impact the bottom line. It's really a good way to think about like risks to a company's future profits.
Sweet. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chase.
Next, I'd love to go to Sarah from Sacramento.
Hi, this is Sarah from Sacramento.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello. So my question is, I recently saw that public health officials have said there might be multiple phases of social distancing, like 5 to 6 months of on again, off again, until there's a coronavirus vaccine. So I'm wondering how this would affect businesses, this kind of starting and stopping.
It's a great question. I think social distancing affects different industries differently. You know, the movie theater industry, are they going to do what the White House press corps is doing, which is like, you know, alternate each seat and have that be a phase in to kind of normalcy? You know, water parks and theme parks, certain industries are definitely impacted more by social distancing. I can't really speak to kind of the public health, you know, how many phases will there be, but the essence of the question, will certain businesses suffer even if we only partly undo social distancing? I think so.
If you're looking for a visual on this, you can go back to our takeaway slide, the third one with the U versus the V shape. What you're describing there would probably mean overall the economy is looking more like a U-shaped recovery. So that's what the general trend would be. And then you can look at the more specific sectors like restaurants, where it'd be hard to be in business one week and then off the next week.
And the U versus V shape, it's so important because the value of a stock is primarily driven by the future profits that investors think the company will make. And if we have a quick V-shaped recovery, then, you know, that gap of suffering profits, sick profits, if you will, it's going to be shorter. And investors can think to themselves, okay, profits will go back to normal sooner than later. But if it's that really awkward long U where the public health crisis just drags on, then instead of thinking about 1 or 2 quarters of profits declining or going into a loss territory, it could be 1 or 2 years. And then it gets more and more painful to profits and therefore the stock price.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Next, I'd love to go to Morgan in Monroe, New York. Hey, Morgan.
Hi. I just want to let you guys know I've been averaging a little over 2 miles during your pod, so not too bad.
Not
my
bad.
Question, do you have any general tips for digesting confusing business news stories?
Well, we have our headline hammer, which is how Jack and I and Rebecca, our third snacker, do it every day at Robinhood. What we do is we really try to like build out a wide resource of companies that we go to for news, but also the primary sources. You know, we like to dip into the earnings reports, the press releases, the annual reports that are coming out from the companies. And we actually, in terms of like a practical thing you can do for like getting a digestible routine, we have tabs on the top of like our Google Chrome browsers where we've set like a bunch of the go-to news sources we look at every day. And you can have a couple tabs. Maybe one is the one you go to every day. One is the one you check weekly. And then when you're actually approaching the story, we just kind of are skimming through for what we think is the most relevant. And then we're doing deep dives into them. But that's kind of the practical way about how we begin our headline hammering process to come up with stories every day for the podcast and newsletter.
Thanks. Could I just ask, what are the news sources you mainly use?
Sure. You know, I actually really like the website TechMeme, which kind of aggregates lots of different tech relevant headlines into what it thinks are like the biggest stories. Nick, I check out the Wall Street Journal. I like certain blogs like Jalopnik is a funny automotive blog that gets us kind of some under the radar stories. what else? I think NPR is great with economics news and financial news. Like if the Fed does something, NPR will break that down in a really effective way.
We've kind of got a Venn diagram situation going on. We're like, there are a bunch of the core news sources we all go to. Like Jack and I are both checking the Wall Street Journal every day, and Bloomberg and CNN is like our go-tos. But then we're branching off into these more deep dive ones. Like Jack mentioned Jalopnik for cars. I go to Business of Fashion for fashion news. And that's kind of how we can cast a wide net between us. You can kind of do the same thing with your friends too, if you ever want to set something like that up.
Morgan, couple other things, do you listen to the podcast or do you read the newsletter or both?
Usually just the podcast.
Okay. Well, we also have Robinhood Snacks, the daily email newsletter, in which we cover a couple of the stories from the podcast, sometimes different stories. But then we also have a section in the newsletter called What Else We're Snacking, where we basically take like the 6 or 7 other stories that almost made the cut and got into our podcast and newsletter, but we decided it wasn't quite worthy enough to get in there. So that's a nice way that we can help you kind of keep up with not just the stories that we cover, but the stories we almost covered. And then finally, the Robinhood app has a news feed. Regardless of whether you're investing, you can check out the news feed, which gives you free access to the Wall Street Journal, also CNN and Reuters, and lots of other really top quality journalism.
Awesome.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome.
Next, I'd love to go to Jordan from Yale. Hey, Jordan.
Oh, Jordan, you're the carpool karaoke guy.
Yeah.
Hey guys, what's up? I'm here.
Hi.
I'm here with Emma right now.
We're
Amazing.
so happy.
Hey, really nice.
You guys had the best video. That was fantastic.
That's awesome. So we just wanted to ask you. So we loved watching your video that you guys made about how you guys kind of make the pod every single day, and the YouTube video, and we were kind of just wondering how that has kind of changed since you guys been dealing with this Corona-conomy.
Oh. Well, we've been remote.
Different places.
Nick and I have not been together since. There
we go.
That's the remote recording equipment that we use.
And it looks like a CIA setup in the
rural
room.
Vermont, Jordan. And did you say Emma?
Yes.
Great. Jordan and Emma, I'm in upstate Vermont, if you will, and the internet connection just isn't that great. But the way that we do it is we use FaceTime on our MacBooks to try to emulate being in the same room. So we will literally just have a FaceTime phone conversation, and then Nick will have his remote recording equipment. I'll have mine. We'll speak into the microphone, but we'll be like talking through FaceTime. And so we have 2 audio files, Nick's and mine. We email them to Cadence 13, our production company. And, just like they do when we're in studio, they make it a beautiful podcast instead of just a bunch of raw footage. So the big difference is we're not in the same place, and we try to get over that with FaceTime.
But we're doing the same kind of virtual high fives, and it's like the same enthusiasm after every story. It's just that people in the house who can't see Jack on my end think that I'm crazy, and it's a weird CIA setup.
Yeah, my wife has the patience of a saint, like listening to so many one-sided podcasts.
They only get half the pod, even though it's the whole duration of the pod.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We love you guys so much.
Thanks, guys.
Very, very much.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Jessica in Texas for a Jessica to Jessica question.
Cool.
Hi. I love you guys.
Yes.
Thanks for taking my question. So our state, Texas, just extended shelter in place until May 20th. Ouch.
Wow.
Yeah. So it just seems like it's going to be a killer for small business. I mean, 1 month is one thing, but extending this out even longer through May, even with the Trump package to help the small businesses, like, how do you guys feel about that? How do you see it playing out?
Well, we feel awful about the small businesses. We think about the yoga studios and the restaurants we would go to on our streets in San Francisco. I'm from New York City originally, which has been hit incredibly hard. The city thrives off of small businesses as energy on every street corner. And for Jack, same thing in Vermont, where it's filled with small businesses. So this is something we think of a lot. And really the most tangible thing that's happened to support them are two things. One, this $2 trillion stimulus bill. And then two, really kind of honestly the efforts of individuals maybe to populate those restaurants by buying gift certificates or to continue their subscription to the monthly Pilates place that they would go to. So it's kind of a combination of the two that's sustaining things in this very moment.
Yeah, I actually, while I'm here in Vermont, I'm like torn. Like one side of me wants to tighten my belt and save money because of this great uncertainty.
Yeah.
The other side of me wants to support my favorite businesses, which I know are immensely struggling right now. I actually follow my favorite restaurants on Instagram, and they've been posting little menus of like the takeout that they have that night. And so I've tried to do that a few times. So, there's little ways that we can chip in to try to help our favorite businesses. And I hope lots and lots of Americans are doing that. But that's not enough. I think we all know that that's not enough. So the $2 trillion survival bill Nick mentioned, $350 billion of it is for small and medium-sized businesses. Those are loans, but they become grants if you don't lay off your workers. I do think that Congress is likely to pass another bill if it looks like that money is running out. And then, I hope that these small and medium-sized businesses get support from the government and are able to stay open and they don't lay off their workers. But if some of them do, if they say, I can't keep it open until May 20th in Texas, then they might lay off their workers. Now, the good news is if that happens, we do have unemployment insurance that's like seriously been juiced up for this crazy period. So whatever Texas was going to pay people who got laid off, the federal government is going to pay $600 more a week than that. So, again, this is a survival bill. We want to make sure that people don't miss their rent payments. They don't start going into debt. They don't go personally bankrupt. And if we can do that, then when the public health crisis is over, the economy is a car and the car is ready to start driving again. That's what we can all hope. And I do think Congress is ready to act, like if the money that they've allocated isn't enough. But there's so much uncertainty, Jessica. We're going to keep covering it every day as the news rolls in.
Thanks guys.
Jessica.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Alex Yu in Los Angeles.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my question. I've been a big fan of the pod for a while, and I'm just wondering, markets have been up the last 2 days, the jobless claims that have exceeded even the worst analyst expectations. I'm just wondering your takes on this.
Well, one take I have is, today, actually, we didn't get the jobless claims numbers. We got the monthly unemployment report, which was for the month of March. So we just learned that 700,000 jobs were lost in the month of March. And the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.4%. The thing is, that March report, that's old. I mean, it's a lagging report. And Wall Street and investors in general, they pride themselves on predicting things before they happen. There were enough signals that people knew there was going to be job losses in March. And it's almost like once Wall Street gets a hint that the jobless claims is going to be this, they make their move, whatever it is, as early as possible. So it's possible that even if economic expectations were surpassed by these reports, maybe investors were expecting it to a degree, and maybe they think, okay, jobs are one thing, but profits are another. As I mentioned earlier, profits are the key things that drive stock prices.
And Alex, one thing this is a great lesson in this moment is that everyday stock price movements don't always have a reason. We can't always attribute it to something. Every day, Jack and I are covering the markets and we're covering specific business stories and every now and then a macro story or something on a trend. But when it comes to what the Dow and the S&P 500 are doing, sometimes you can't exactly explain it. And that's why we kind of zoom out to look at the bigger stock chart about where are things moving in a general direction over the course of a week or a month as opposed to 1 or 2 days.
Maybe it's the jobless claims news that's driving the stocks, or maybe they weren't even looking at that because they were focused on the number of infections in New York City, which was like an indicator of how quickly things can go back to normal. We just don't know in some cases. It's a great point, Nick.
Got it. Thank you guys for providing some clarity.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for tuning in, man.
Next, I'd love to go to Priyal at Dartmouth. Hey.
Hey, Priyal, I think you're muted right now.
You still tuned in?
Priyal, I see the mute indicator. If you could find the unmute.
I had a couple big green jokes lined up.
You know what? Let's go to our next question and see if we can circle back. Max in Detroit. Max in Detroit. Hey, Max.
What's up, guys? Can you hear me?
Hey, Max. Yes, we can hear you.
All right, Nick. I actually emailed you earlier today, man. I'm happy to finally get on the podcast.
I know. I think I emailed you back, right?
Yeah, you did. Yeah,
nice.
You did.
Great.
So first off, I'll give a shout out to Michigan. I'm a Michigan guy as well. And like Nick, I had no facial hair in college, but I have some now. So really happy to join you guys. But I had a question about how I think a certain subsector of companies can really flourish in a time like this. Mm-hmm. And I think big tech is probably one of those as well. So I sent this question off to you guys earlier, but is this a time where we see certain tech companies who have a really concentrated top line start to try to diversify out? And the example that I sent Nick earlier was, are we going to see something like Facebook really trying to push Facebook gaming, given that everyone's already using the platform, but now with ad revenue declining, they're looking to monetize something else?
Well, Max, thanks for sending the question. It was good to get it back and forth with you. Jack and I actually read your question together, and then we're debating it and discussing it before this event. And we were thinking of a couple things. One of them we think is going to be really interesting over the next year is that you may be working from home. You may be the kind of person who's like, you've noticed that productivity has slowed down or it's a little different now that you're not back in the office. Well, tech companies that are providing you all those services you're using right now, like, you know, when you're checking Facebook or on Netflix or maybe on your Peloton, they're also in a similar situation. You know, their employees are working from home too. They're kind of managing through this awkward transition period. So we're actually curious to see if there's a delay in product launches, as well as like teams at some of these companies who are using their products like have to wait up and like not be able to productively get these out to the market in the same way they would have like before the Corona-conomy. So we're curious to actually see if there's a delay in these products as opposed to like just a slow ability to launch them.
Now, we did see one acceleration of something just like what you described, Max. We covered this 2 weeks ago. Google has a moonshot called Verily. And Verily is a health science, like, you know, make the world better, Project X, other bet of Alphabet. And they recently just rolled out their basically like COVID-19 national registration website. So they saw an opportunity and they're like, whoa, we can fill this need. Let's expand Alphabet into this area. It happens to be in the healthcare industry, which is something we've seen a lot of hints that Alphabet wants to get into. So some of what you suggested, Matt, we at least saw that once.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I read about that in the journal too, actually, guys. So it's I read the Snacks every single day. I love the way that you guys put everything into perspective. You know, and obviously always happy to support a couple of Michigan guys as well. I think you're doing a great job. Go Blue.
Thank you, Max. Go Blue.
Thanks, Max.
Next, I'd love to try to go to Camila in Guatemala. If you're there. Hey, Camila.
Hey, well, thank you for picking up my question.
Thanks,
I love
Camila.
your podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks.
And it's good to put faces to the voices. Well, I was wondering, how is the U.S. going to recuperate from this stimulus package or survival package? Like, do you see much inflation? Like, do you project a lot of inflation after this?
Wow, an inflation question. As an economics major, I am excited. Come on. Well, we have one precedent here, which is after the 2008 financial crisis, the government passed a stimulus bill that was $700 billion. Actually, I think it was almost $800 billion. So the one we have, the stimulus bill currently, is 2.5 times that. Now, what might cause, now just to go back to that example, after 2008, we did not have a lot of inflation, despite that supercharge of money into the economy. And for this one, you know, as we mentioned, there is a giant hole in the economy because people aren't spending, and the government's aim is to fill that hole with $2 trillion of government spending because businesses and consumers aren't. So in that sense, it could just be like kind of a break even in terms of money supply, which might drive inflation. So we'll see, but there are kind of those countering forces.
Camila, if you're really curious about this too, another area you can deep dive into it is you can follow some of the Fed governors. One of them who we think is really interesting is a guy named Neil Kashkari, who's I think the Minneapolis Fed governor. Pretty young guy. I think he might be the youngest of the Fed governors. And he came out pretty boldly the other day to say that he was part of, and a lot of the Fed governors right now who are running the nation's central bank were part of the 2008, stimulus process. And they've learned the lessons from it, and they're applying that here. And one of the things he's echoed pretty resolutely is because in 2008, we didn't see that type of inflation right afterwards. That's why the Fed is so proactive right now and willing to do so much to support the economy. Because the threat that everyone kept talking about for like the 4 or 5 years after 2008, when Jack and I were living in the East Village in New York, and we heard about it every day, inflation's coming, just didn't happen.
Never came.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you,
Thanks, Camille.
Next, I'd love to go to Dennis in Munich if we could continue our around the world tour. Hey, Dennis.
Hi, this is Dennis from Munich, Germany. I love your pod. I listen to it every day, actually, even though it comes out in the afternoon for me, but I mean, still works. I'm wondering, I'm following closely the elections in the US, and I'm wondering how you think this will impact the elections. And I'm also wondering if you think the whole crisis is changing the public's view on universal healthcare.
Well, Dennis, I studied abroad in Germany real quick, and just want to say that a day trip from Munich to Zugspitze is like such a fun thing to do. I got to do on the Autobahn.
I visited Jack in Germany for that part, and I want to say that we were able to survive on pretzels and chocolate for 3 straight days only. So that is possible if you want to make a long weekend trip out of that on just those things.
So Dennis, they say that American elections is all about the economy, stupid. It's always about the economy. But it's almost feeling like this one, it's actually not the economy. It's like our livelihoods. Like, the White House thinks in a good case scenario, 200 to 240,000 people could die. So while the economy is usually like the number one thing on people's minds in America, when they think about who to vote for, I just can't say what'll happen this time. And your point about healthcare, it's a really good one. I mean, it's so sad that the 10 million people who've been laid off in the past 2 weeks, if they're losing healthcare when there's a global pandemic, I mean, that is really, really sad. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of debates between President Trump and whoever the Democrats decide about, like, is this right that so many people got laid off and they lost their health insurance? Like, that, it feels pretty cruel at this moment, I gotta say.
Dennis, one of the great things about when Jack and I were in business school at the same time is that you're constantly reading through case studies, and your life consists of seeing examples of things in different places that are similar and comparing them. And, one of the interesting things about this pandemic is that every country is approaching it in similar ways, but slightly different ways. So like some of the variables are constant and some aren't. And so what's going to be fascinating after this pandemic is over to see is, each country's case study. How did the healthcare system in one country manage it compared to another? So I think, and, we talked about this before, Jack and I have when we look back on this, what are the lessons we'll have learned? Well, the great thing is we've got a bunch of different case studies we can look at of countries that all approach the same problem in slightly different ways.
Yeah, that's true. It's really interesting here. Even for us, we compare ourselves to Italy and Spain and think, why is it so different? They have the same healthcare system and all of that, but in the end, it's minor stuff that like in Italy, people are living together with their family. In Germany, not as much. And thanks for your answer. It's really interesting.
Ich bedanke mich.
Danke.
Dankeschön.
Pizza.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end, but I would like to try to go to Logan in San Francisco if they're available.
Logan is absolutely available. Thank you so much. What an honor, and not going to lie, a lot of pressure if this is one of the last questions. So hopefully it lives up to it. So I'm totally curious. If you could go to dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would you go to dinner with? And what's the first question that you would ask?
Oh, man. I am a big World War II buff, and Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, I mean, that guy had lived through a bunch of New York stuff. I'll leave the New York stuff to you, Nick. He was the governor of New York. But to help the American economy get through the Great Depression and then see Pearl Harbor happen and then build up the military for 3 years to strike on D-Day in 1944, that's when we entered the war. I guess I would ask FDR, what was it like those 2 years after Pearl Harbor and before D-Day, where we knew we were going to do it, but we hadn't struck yet? Those 2 years must have been agonizing, but necessary. And the patience he showed to wait for the right moment to strike Europe is incredible. Sorry for going on a long history.
No, that's fantastic one. I got to throw kind of two out there. One, building off of Jack's, I love what he said. We should probably get Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR in a room because such fascinating elements from both of them. And she was such an powerful, impressive woman. So both of them together, I think, could count as one. So that's fair. Two, I'd probably say, I worked and lived in South Africa for a few months on a project once. And having seen what Nelson Mandela went through, I think in the last 40, 50 years, probably one of the most challenging things anyone's ever faced within their own country. So to relate it to this moment right now, would be curious to what he would say about, handling and showing people hope and positivity to get through this. And what are the exact notes he would hit?
I love it. Thank you both so much. And thank you so much for bringing the energy and the insight every single day. I love recommending the pod. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks,
very
Logan.
much.
That's awesome.
Cheers.
It is 1 p.m. here in San Francisco, so I want to let you guys do what you need to do.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this first one yet. It did feel like the best one yet. We hope you agree.
Yes.
It's a real pleasure to spend time with you now, and I hope we do these again soon.
We have been really excited, looking forward to this. We really hope to do it again. We're going to follow up with all of you and try to share this deck or elements of this deck with you. And we're also going to ask you what you thought. We thrive off feedback. We want to know what you're thinking, what we could do differently next time. So look out for an email from us on this.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to leave this up on the screen, but we will talk to you Monday morning in the podcast or the newsletter.
Can't wait. Bye, guys.